Sarah
We've
Martinez
got a
had always
situation.
known she was
The
different from the
readings are
other
off the
intelligence
charts.
operatives, but she never imagined how much that difference would cost her during her first months at the classified facility known only as Site-7. Located deep in the Nevada desert, the Blacksite served as a training ground and operational hub for the most sensitive government intelligence work. The concrete buildings rose from the sand like monuments to secrecy, their windows tinted so dark they appeared black even in the harsh desert sun. When Sarah arrived at Site-7 in the early morning hours of a Tuesday in March, she carried with her a duffel bag containing everything the government deemed necessary for her new life. The bag held 3 sets of identical gray uniforms, basic toiletries, and a single photograph of her younger brother Miguel, who had been killed in action overseas 2 years earlier. That photograph was the only personal item she was permitted to bring into her new world. The orientation process at Site-7 was unlike anything Sarah had experienced during her previous military service. She was assigned to Dormitory Block C, a stark building that housed female operatives in training. Her room measured exactly 8 feet by 10 feet and contained a narrow bed, a metal desk, and a small locker. The walls were painted an institutional beige that seemed designed to drain hope from anyone who stared at them too long. From her first day, Sarah noticed the way other trainees looked at her. She was one of only 3 women in a group of 47 new recruits, and her slight build and quiet demeanor made her stand out even more. The other operatives had backgrounds in special forces, elite military units, or prestigious intelligence academies. Sarah's path to Site-7 had been different. She had been recruited directly from a small-town police department where she worked as a forensic accountant, tracking financial crimes for cases that rarely made the local newspaper. The training regimen at Site-7 was designed to break down recruits before building them back up into effective intelligence operatives. Days began at 5 in the morning with physical conditioning that pushed every trainee to their limits. Sarah struggled with the running, climbing, and combat training that came naturally to her peers. While others completed obstacle courses with military precision, she lagged behind, her breathing heavy and her movements awkward. Commander James Harrison oversaw all training operations at Site-7. A man in his mid-50s with steel-gray hair and piercing blue eyes, Harrison had built his reputation on producing some of the most effective intelligence operatives in government service. He demanded perfection from his trainees and showed little patience for those who failed to meet his exacting standards. From the beginning, Harrison made it clear that he viewed Sarah as a mistake in the recruitment process. During her second week at the facility, Sarah found herself the target of increasingly harsh criticism from both Harrison and her fellow trainees. In the mess hall, conversations would stop when she approached tables where others were eating. During training exercises, she was often excluded from team formations or assigned to tasks that seemed designed more to humiliate than educate. The other recruits began referring to her as Spreadsheet, a reference to her background in financial analysis that they delivered with barely concealed contempt. The psychological pressure intensified during the facility's specialized interrogation training. Recruits were required to resist questioning techniques that would be used against captured operatives in the field. Sarah's turn came on a Friday afternoon in a windowless room deep beneath the main facility. Commander Harrison personally conducted her session, using methods that went beyond standard training protocols. For 6 hours, he subjected her to verbal harassment, stress positions, and psychological manipulation designed to break her will. Throughout the ordeal, Harrison focused on Sarah's perceived weaknesses. He questioned her loyalty to the country, suggested she had been recruited by mistake, and implied that her presence at Site-7 endangered national security. He told her that real operatives needed physical strength and mental toughness that she clearly lacked. The session ended only when Sarah collapsed from exhaustion, but she never broke her silence or revealed any of the classified information she had been instructed to protect. News of Sarah's performance during interrogation training spread quickly through the facility. Instead of earning respect for her resistance, she found herself facing increased hostility from other trainees who viewed her collapse as a sign of weakness. The ridicule became more open and aggressive. During combat training, partners would use excessive force against her. In academic sessions, her questions were met with eye rolls and dismissive comments from instructors. The breaking point came during a night training exercise in the desert surrounding Site 7. Trainees were divided into teams and given a mission to infiltrate a mock enemy compound and retrieve classified documents. Sarah was assigned to Team Delta, led by Marcus Reed, a former Navy SEAL who had made no secret of his belief that women had no place in intelligence operations. The exercise was designed to test everything the trainees had learned about stealth, tactics, and teamwork. Team Delta's mission went wrong from the beginning. Reed ignored Sarah's input during the planning phase, treating her suggestions with open disdain. When she pointed out potential security weaknesses in their approach route, he dismissed her observations as the nervous concerns of someone who didn't understand real operational work. The other team members followed Reed's lead, excluding Sarah from key discussions and treating her as a liability rather than an asset. The mock compound was defended by instructors playing the role of enemy forces. As Team Delta approached their target, Sarah noticed something the others had missed. The patrol patterns she had observed during their reconnaissance didn't match the standard defensive configurations they had studied in training. She tried to warn Reed that they were walking into a trap, but he silenced her with a harsh gesture and ordered the team to proceed with the original plan. The ambush came exactly as Sarah had predicted. Instructor teams emerged from concealed positions and quickly overwhelmed Team Delta using non-lethal simulation weapons. Within minutes, every member of the team except Sarah had been killed in the exercise. She had positioned herself slightly apart from the main group, following her instincts despite Reed's orders, and managed to escape the initial assault. Alone in the desert darkness, Sarah faced a choice. She could surrender and accept failure along with the rest of her team, or she could attempt to complete the mission on her own. The logical decision was to surrender. She lacked the physical skills of her teammates and had no support. But something deeper than logic drove her forward through the sand and scrub brush toward the compound. Using skills that had nothing to do with her formal training, Sarah approached the target from an angle no one expected. Her background in financial investigation had taught her to notice patterns and inconsistencies that others missed. She observed the guard rotations with the same attention to detail she had once applied to tracking money through complex corporate structures. Where her teammates had seen a fortress, she saw a puzzle to be solved through patience and careful analysis. It took Sarah 3 hours to penetrate the compound's defenses. She moved slowly and carefully, avoiding detection by timing her movements to coincide with shift changes and momentary lapses in surveillance coverage. When she finally reached the building containing the target documents, she found herself face to face with the exercise's final challenge. Commander Harrison himself was stationed inside, waiting to capture anyone who made it that far. The confrontation between Sarah and Harrison in that small room marked a turning point that neither of them fully understood at the time. Harrison had expected to quickly overwhelm Sarah with the same aggressive techniques he used during interrogation training. But something had changed in Sarah during her solitary journey through the desert. The weeks of ridicule and isolation had stripped away her self-doubt, leaving behind a core of determination that surprised both of them. Instead of trying to match Harrison's physical strength, Sarah used the same analytical approach that had gotten her past the compound's defenses. She studied his movements and breathing patterns, looking for the small tells that revealed his intentions. When he moved to restrain her, she was already somewhere else, having anticipated his action based on subtle shifts in his posture. The engagement lasted only minutes, but it ended with Harrison unconscious on the floor and Sarah holding the target documents. The successful completion of the mission should have earned Sarah respect from her peers and instructors. Instead, it intensified the hostility she faced at Site 7. Commander Harrison was furious that he had been defeated by someone he considered the weakest member of the training class. The other trainees resented her success and began spreading rumors that she had cheated or received help from instructors who felt sorry for her. The ridicule reached new levels of cruelty in the days following the desert exercise. Sarah's belongings were vandalized, her food was tampered with, and she found herself completely isolated from the social networks that helped other trainees cope with the stress of their training. The photograph of her brother Miguel was stolen from her locker and returned days later with crude modifications that mocked both his memory and her grief. Through all of this harassment, Sarah maintained her focus on the training itself. She continued to struggle with the physical demands of the program, but her analytical skills grew stronger with each academic challenge. She excelled in courses on intelligence analysis, cryptography, and operational planning. Her instructors began to notice that while she couldn't outfight her classmates, she could consistently outthink them in complex problem-solving scenarios. The isolation that was meant to break Sarah's spirit instead provided her with opportunities that her tormentors never realized they were giving her. While other trainees spent their free time in group activities, she explored the facility on her own, learning its layout and routines with the thoroughness of someone who had nothing else to occupy her attention. She began to notice things about Site 7 that others missed, small inconsistencies, and unusual patterns that triggered the same investigative instincts that had once helped her uncover financial fraud. One discovery particularly caught Sarah's attention during her solitary explorations. While mapping the facility's underground levels, she found evidence of construction work that didn't appear on any of the building plans she had access to through her training materials. There were sealed corridors and reinforced doorways that suggested the existence of areas not included in the official layout of Site 7. Her attempts to learn more about these hidden sections were met with evasive responses from instructors and warnings to focus on her assigned training activities. The mystery deepened when Sarah began noticing vehicles arriving at Site 7 during the early morning hours when most trainees were sleeping. These vehicles used different entrances than the ones designated for training operations, and their occupants were never seen in the areas where recruits worked and lived. The pattern suggested that Site 7 served purposes beyond the training of intelligence operatives, but Sarah's attempts to investigate further were blocked by security measures she couldn't bypass. As her training period at Site 7 entered its final months, Sarah found herself caught between her desire to complete the program successfully and her growing suspicion that something at the facility was not what it appeared to be. The ridicule from her fellow trainees had become a constant background noise in her life, but she had learned to use their dismissive attitudes to her advantage. When people expect nothing from you, she realized, they stop watching you carefully, and that lack of attention can become a powerful tool. The stage was being set for revelations that would transform not only Sarah's understanding of Site 7 but her entire perception of the intelligence community she had devoted herself to serving. The darkest secrets of the facility remained hidden, but Sarah's unique position as an outsider within the system was about to provide her with access to information that would change everything. The breakthrough that would eventually expose Commander Harrison's darkest secret began with a seemingly routine maintenance issue in Sarah's dormitory. A burst pipe in the basement of Block C flooded several storage areas during a particularly cold night in November, forcing maintenance crews to relocate equipment and files that had been stored in the affected rooms. Sarah volunteered to help with the cleanup effort, partly out of genuine desire to assist, and partly because she hoped the work might provide her with access to areas of the facility she had never seen before. Working alongside the maintenance staff, Sarah found herself handling boxes of documents that dated back several years before her arrival at Site 7. Most of the papers were routine administrative materials, training schedules, and equipment inventories that held little interest. However, buried among the mundane paperwork, she discovered a collection of personnel files that seemed different from anything she had encountered during her training. These files contained detailed psychological profiles, medical records, and performance evaluations for operatives who had graduated from Site 7. But the information they contained painted a disturbing picture of what happened to some trainees after they completed the program. According to the documents Sarah found, several former Site 7 graduates had been assigned to operations that were not officially acknowledged by any government agency. These operatives had disappeared into assignments with code names like Deep Echo and Silent Thunder, programs that appeared to operate outside normal intelligence oversight. The files suggested that these missing operatives had been selected based on specific psychological profiles that made them suitable for work that required complete isolation from conventional support networks. What troubled Sarah most about these discoveries was the realization that many of the missing operatives shared characteristics similar to her own situation at Site 7. They had been isolated from their peer groups during training, subjected to unusual levels of harassment and psychological pressure, and ultimately separated from the normal career paths followed by other graduates. The pattern suggested that the ridicule and isolation she had experienced might not have been random hazing but rather a deliberate selection process designed to identify operatives who could function effectively without social connections or institutional support. Sarah's investigation into these hidden programs was complicated by the sophisticated security measures that protected Site 7's most sensitive information. The facility's computer systems were isolated from external networks and protected by multiple layers of encryption and access controls. However, Sarah's background in financial investigation had taught her that the most valuable information is often found not in heavily protected databases, but in the seemingly innocuous records that organizations use to track their day-to-day operations. She began paying closer attention to the logistical details that supported Site 7's operations. By tracking patterns in supply deliveries, personnel movements, and facility maintenance schedules, she started to build a picture of activities that were not reflected in the official training curriculum. Her analysis revealed that certain areas of the facility experienced periodic increases in power consumption, water usage, and waste disposal that coincided with the arrival of unmarked vehicles during the pre-dawn hours. The most significant breakthrough in Sarah's investigation came when she discovered that Commander Harrison maintained a private office in one of the facility's hidden sections. This office was not listed on any organizational chart she had access to, and its existence was concealed behind a series of false walls and misdirected corridor layouts. Sarah only learned of its location by following the patterns of Harrison's movements through the facility over several weeks, noting that he would sometimes disappear for hours at a time without appearing in any of the areas where he was officially supposed to be working. Gaining access to Harrison's hidden office required Sarah to use every skill she had developed during her months of isolation at Site 7. She had to navigate the facility's security systems without triggering alarms, bypass electronic locks that protected sensitive areas, and avoid detection by the surveillance cameras that monitored all official corridors. The operation took her 3 nights of careful preparation and precise timing, but she finally managed to breach the security that protected Harrison's most private workspace. What Sarah found in Harrison's hidden office exceeded her worst expectations about the secret operations being conducted at Site 7. The room contained detailed files on dozens of former trainees who had been selected for programs that bore no resemblance to legitimate intelligence work. These operatives had been assigned to eliminate targets that were not enemy agents or foreign threats, but rather American citizens who had somehow become inconvenient to powerful interests within the government. The assassination program that Harrison managed from his secret office operated under the cover of routine intelligence training at Site 7. Trainees who showed the right combination of skills, isolation, and psychological vulnerability were quietly diverted from normal career paths and inducted into a network of killers who carried out domestic operations that could never be officially acknowledged. The program had been operating for over a decade, and its existence was known only to a small circle of senior officials who used it to eliminate political opponents, whistleblowers, and anyone else who threatened their power. Harrison's personal files revealed the full scope of his involvement in these illegal operations. He had not simply been following orders from his superiors, but had actively shaped the assassination program to serve his own interests. Many of the targets eliminated by Site 7 operatives had been selected not for national security reasons, but because they possessed information that could damage Harrison's career or expose his involvement in other criminal activities. The most shocking revelation in Harrison's files was the discovery that Sarah herself had been selected for recruitment into the assassination program. Her background in financial investigation, combined with her isolation from other trainees and her demonstrated ability to work independently, made her an ideal candidate for operations that required someone who could appear unremarkable while conducting surveillance and eliminations in civilian settings. The ridicule and harassment she had endured were not random cruelty, but rather a systematic conditioning process designed to strip away her connections to normal society and prepare her for a life of sanctioned murder. Sarah's planned induction into the assassination program was scheduled to occur immediately after the completion of her training at Site 7. She would be told that she had been selected for a prestigious deep cover assignment that required absolute secrecy. Once isolated from any support system, she would be gradually introduced to the true nature of her work through a series of operations that would progressively compromise her ability to return to legitimate society. The process was designed to be irreversible, trapping operatives in a world where their only option was continued service to Harrison's network. The evidence Sarah had gathered was overwhelming, but she faced an impossible dilemma in deciding how to use it. The normal channels for reporting criminal activity within the intelligence community had been compromised by the very people who were supposed to provide oversight for operations like Site 7. Harrison's files included detailed information about officials in Congress, the Justice Department, and other agencies who were either directly involved in the assassination program or who had been compromised through blackmail and corruption. Even more troubling was Sarah's realization that her discovery of Harrison's secret office had not gone unnoticed. The security systems she had bypassed were more sophisticated than she had initially understood, and her intrusions had left traces that experienced investigators could detect. Harrison was already beginning to suspect that someone had accessed his private files, and he had initiated procedures designed to identify and eliminate the security breach. The pressure on Sarah intensified when she noticed changes in her daily routine at Site 7 that suggested she was being watched more closely than usual. Her room was searched while she was attending training sessions. Her conversations with instructors and other trainees were monitored more carefully, and she was excluded from certain exercises that might have given her opportunities to communicate with people outside the facility. The net was closing around her, and she realized that Harrison was preparing to accelerate her induction into the assassination program before she could expose what she had learned. Sarah's situation was further complicated by the realization that she had no allies within Site 7 who could help her escape or report Harrison's crimes. The other trainees viewed her with suspicion and hostility, making them unlikely to believe any accusations she might make against their respected commander. The instructors and administrative staff were either directly involved in the illegal operations or too intimidated by Harrison's power to risk challenging his authority. Her only option was to find a way to get her evidence to people outside the facility who had the power and independence to take action against Harrison's network. However, all communications from Site 7 were monitored and controlled by the same security apparatus that Harrison used to protect his criminal operations. Sarah would need to find a way to bypass these restrictions and establish contact with honest officials who could investigate her revelations without alerting Harrison to what she had discovered. The challenge was made more difficult by Sarah's realization that she was running out of time. Her graduation from the training program was scheduled for the following month, and Harrison's files indicated that her induction into the assassination program would begin immediately afterward. If she failed to expose the conspiracy before completing her training at Site 7, she would be moved to a secure facility where escape would be impossible and where her only choices would be compliance or death. As Sarah prepared to make her move against Harrison's network, she drew strength from the memory of her brother Miguel and the oath she had taken to serve her country with honor. The ridicule and isolation she had endured at Site 7 had been intended to break her spirit and prepare her for a life of crime disguised as patriotic duty. Instead, those experiences had taught her that sometimes the most important battles are fought by those who stand alone against systems of power that have forgotten their original purpose. The stage was now set for a confrontation that would test every skill Sarah had developed during her months of training and investigation. She possessed evidence that could destroy Harrison's assassination network and expose the corruption that had infected the highest levels of the intelligence community. However, she also faced enemies who had decades of experience in eliminating threats to their operations and who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. The ridicule that had defined Sarah's experience at Site 7 was about to transform into something much more dangerous as she prepared to reveal the truth about Commander Harrison's darkest activities. The isolated trainee who had once struggled to complete physical conditioning exercises was now the only person who stood between a criminal conspiracy and the continued corruption of American intelligence operations. Her fight for survival had become a fight for the soul of the institutions she had devoted her life to serving. Sarah's plan to expose Commander Harrison's assassination network required her to take enormous risks with minimal chance of success. The evidence she had gathered was comprehensive, but getting it to the right people outside Site 7 would require bypassing security measures that had been designed by some of the most skilled intelligence professionals in the government. Her only advantage was that Harrison's confidence in his own security arrangements had made him careless about protecting against threats from within his own organization. The first step in Sarah's plan was to establish contact with someone outside the facility who could receive and act on her evidence. Through careful observation of the facility's communication systems, she had identified a narrow window of opportunity during shift changes in the main communications center. For approximately 15 minutes every morning at 0400 hours, the center was staffed by a single operator who was responsible for monitoring multiple systems simultaneously. During these brief periods, it might be possible to send encrypted messages without immediate detection. Sarah spent 2 weeks preparing for her attempt to establish outside contact. She studied the operator's routines, identified the specific terminals that could access external communication channels, and developed a plan for accessing the communications center without triggering the security alarms that protected it. The operation required her to move through areas of the facility that were normally off-limits to trainees, but her months of exploring Site 7's hidden sections had given her intimate knowledge of the building's layout and security weaknesses. The breakthrough moment came when Sarah realized that the communications center's security was designed primarily to prevent outside intrusion rather than to stop someone from sending information outward. The system's most sophisticated defenses were focused on protecting incoming classified materials, while the procedures for monitoring outgoing communications relied heavily on administrative oversight that could be bypassed by someone with detailed knowledge of the facility's operations. On a cold December morning, Sarah executed her plan to contact the outside world. She accessed the communications center during the vulnerable window she had identified and used one of the secure terminals to send an encrypted message to a journalist she had researched extensively. The recipient was Elena Rodriguez, an investigative reporter for a major newspaper who had previously exposed corruption in government agencies and who had a reputation for protecting her sources even under extreme pressure. Sarah's message to Rodriguez was carefully crafted to provide enough information to capture the journalist's attention without revealing details that could be used to identify her if the communication was intercepted. She included general information about the existence of an illegal assassination program operating within the intelligence community and provided specific code names and operational details that could be verified through independent sources. Most importantly, she established a secure communication protocol that would allow Rodriguez to respond without compromising Sarah's safety. The response from Rodriguez came 3 days later through an encrypted channel that used commercial internet services to avoid detection by government monitoring systems. The journalist confirmed that she was willing to investigate Sarah's claims and that she had already begun preliminary research into the operational code names and personnel movements that Sarah had provided. However, Rodriguez also warned that she would need substantial additional evidence before she could publish a story that would expose the assassination program to public scrutiny. Sarah's second communication with Rodriguez included digital copies of some of the most damaging documents from Harrison's secret office. She transmitted financial records showing payments to operatives for unauthorized missions, personnel files detailing the selection and conditioning of assassins, and operational reports describing the elimination of American citizens who had threatened powerful political interests. The evidence was compelling, but Rodriguez still needed corroboration from independent sources to verify its authenticity. The challenge of providing additional verification was complicated by Sarah's realization that Harrison had become aware of the security breach in his private office. Although he had not yet identified her as the source of the leak, he had implemented new security measures throughout Site 7 that made further access to classified materials extremely difficult. More troubling, Harrison had begun conducting private interviews with trainees and staff members in an attempt to identify the person responsible for infiltrating his operations. Sarah's situation became more precarious when she was summoned to Harrison's official office for what was described as a routine evaluation meeting. The commander's demeanor during the interview was superficially professional, but Sarah could sense the underlying tension and suspicion that drove his questioning. Harrison probed her background, her motivations for joining the intelligence community, and her observations about life at Site 7. His questions were designed to elicit responses that might reveal whether she possessed knowledge of activities beyond her official training. During the interview, Sarah was forced to carefully balance her responses to avoid arousing further suspicion while also gathering intelligence about Harrison's investigation into the security breach. She learned that he suspected the leak had come from someone with extensive access to the facility and detailed knowledge of its operations. His investigation was focusing on personnel who had demonstrated unusual interest in areas outside their assigned duties or who had exhibited behavior patterns that suggested they might be conducting unauthorized activities. The psychological pressure of maintaining her cover while continuing her investigation began to take a severe toll on Sarah's mental and physical health. The isolation she had experienced during her early months at Site 7 had been difficult, but manageable. Now she was carrying the weight of knowledge that could expose massive government corruption while simultaneously playing the role of an obedient trainee who suspected nothing unusual about her situation. Sarah's stress was compounded by her growing awareness of the timeline for Harrison's planned operations. According to the documents she had accessed, the assassination network was preparing for a major expansion that would significantly increase the number of domestic targets being eliminated. The expansion was scheduled to coincide with upcoming political developments that would provide cover for increased activity by Harrison's operatives. If Sarah failed to expose the conspiracy soon, many more innocent people would die to protect the secrets of powerful officials. The turning point came when Sarah discovered that Harrison's investigation had identified several potential suspects for the security breach, and she was among them. The commander had developed profiles of trainees and staff members who possessed the skills and access necessary to infiltrate his private office, and Sarah's background in financial investigation combined with her demonstrated ability to bypass security measures had placed her near the top of his list. Harrison's response to the suspected security breach involved implementing what he called enhanced security protocols that were actually designed to isolate and test the individuals he suspected of being responsible for the leak. These protocols included closer surveillance, restricted access to certain areas of the facility, and psychological pressure techniques designed to force the guilty party to reveal themselves through their behavior or to make mistakes that would confirm their involvement. Sarah realized that she was being subjected to the same conditioning techniques that Harrison used to prepare trainees for induction into the assassination program. The enhanced security protocols were intended not just to identify the person responsible for the security breach, but also to begin the process of breaking down their resistance and preparing them for elimination. Harrison was treating the situation as an opportunity to demonstrate his control over Site 7 and to send a message to anyone else who might consider challenging his authority. The evidence Sarah had provided to Elena Rodriguez was beginning to generate results in the outside world. The journalist had used the information to establish contact with other sources within the intelligence community who could verify the existence of Harrison's assassination network. Rodriguez had also begun investigating the financial networks that supported the illegal operations, using her own expertise in following money trails to confirm the accuracy of the documents Sarah had provided. However, the investigation was moving slowly compared to the accelerating danger Sarah faced within Site 7. Rodriguez needed more time to verify her sources and build a comprehensive case that could withstand the legal and political challenges that would inevitably follow publication of her story. Meanwhile, Sarah was running out of options for gathering additional evidence without exposing herself to immediate retaliation from Harrison and his network. The crisis reached a peak when Sarah learned that Harrison had scheduled individual career counseling sessions with each of his suspected security risks. These sessions were designed to appear routine, but Sarah's analysis of the patterns involved suggested that they were actually opportunities for Harrison to conduct detailed psychological evaluations of his suspects. Anyone who failed these evaluations would face immediate consequences that could range from transfer to a secure facility to outright elimination. Sarah's scheduled session with Harrison was set for the following Friday, giving her less than a week to complete her mission or escape from Site 7. She faced a choice between attempting to flee the facility with the evidence she had already gathered or staying to collect additional information that could strengthen the case against Harrison's network. Either option carried enormous risks, but Sarah's training and instincts told her that half measures would not be sufficient to expose a conspiracy that had operated successfully for more than a decade. The decision was made more difficult by Sarah's realization that her investigation had revealed connections between Harrison's assassination network and criminal activities that extended far beyond Site 7. The documents she had uncovered suggested that the illegal operations were part of a larger system of corruption that included officials in multiple government agencies, defense contractors who profited from unauthorized operations, and foreign intelligence services who had been allowed to operate on American soil in exchange for their cooperation with Harrison's network. As Sarah prepared for what might be her final week at Site 7, she drew on the same determination that had sustained her through months of ridicule and isolation. The shy financial analyst who had arrived at the facility had been transformed by her experiences into someone capable of challenging the most dangerous elements within the American intelligence community. Her fight was no longer just about exposing Harrison's crimes, but about defending the principles that had originally motivated her to serve her country. The ridicule she had endured from her fellow trainees now seemed insignificant compared to the life and death struggle she faced against Harrison's assassination network. The isolation that had once been a source of pain had become a source of strength, teaching her to rely on her own judgment and abilities rather than seeking validation from institutions that had been corrupted by the very people they were supposed to serve. Sarah was about to discover whether the skills she had developed in the shadows of Site 7 would be sufficient to bring down one of the most dangerous criminal conspiracies in American history. The week leading up to Sarah's scheduled career counseling session with Commander Harrison transformed Site 7 into a psychological battlefield where every interaction carried potentially lethal consequences. Sarah knew that Harrison's evaluation would be designed to determine whether she posed a threat to his assassination network, and failure to convince him of her ignorance and compliance would result in her immediate elimination. The stakes could not have been higher, yet she also recognized that this meeting might provide her final opportunity to gather the evidence needed to completely destroy Harrison's criminal organization. Sarah's preparation for the confrontation required her to master skills that had never been part of her formal training at Site 7. She needed to become an expert in deception while maintaining access to her authentic emotions and reactions. Harrison's psychological evaluation techniques were designed to detect inconsistencies in behavior and speech patterns that would reveal whether someone was hiding significant information. Sarah's only chance of survival was to present herself as exactly what Harrison expected to see, a struggling trainee who was focused entirely on completing her program and beginning her legitimate intelligence career. The challenge was complicated by Sarah's knowledge that Harrison had been conducting surveillance operations against his suspected security risks throughout the week. Her room was being monitored by devices that could detect changes in her sleep patterns, stress levels, and daily routines that might indicate guilty knowledge or preparation for suspicious activities. Sarah had to maintain the appearance of normal behavior while actually engaging in intensive mental preparation for what might be the most important performance of her life. Elena Rodriguez's investigation was generating significant pressure on Harrison's network from outside Site 7, though Sarah had no way of knowing the full extent of the journalist's progress. Rodriguez had used the evidence Sarah provided to establish contact with multiple sources within various government agencies who were willing to confirm aspects of the assassination program's existence. The journalist had also begun coordinating with federal law enforcement officials who specialized in investigating corruption within the intelligence community. However, Rodriguez's external investigation was creating dangerous ripple effects that Harrison's network was beginning to detect. Phone calls were being made between agency officials who normally had no reason to communicate with each other. Database searches were being conducted for information about operations that were supposed to be completely compartmentalized. Financial audits were being initiated for programs that had previously operated without oversight. Harrison's criminal network was starting to realize that they were facing a coordinated investigation that threatened to expose their entire operation. Sarah's final attempt to gather additional evidence took place 3 nights before her scheduled meeting with Harrison. Using techniques she had perfected during months of exploring Site-7's hidden areas, she accessed Harrison's secret office for what she knew would be the last time. The commander's paranoia about the security breach had led him to install additional protective measures, but his focus on preventing future intrusions had left vulnerabilities in the systems designed to detect past access attempts. The documents Sarah discovered during this final infiltration confirmed her worst fears about the scope and timeline of Harrison's planned operations. The assassination network was preparing to eliminate more than 24 targets across the United States in coordinated operations designed to appear as accidents, suicides, or random crimes. The targets included journalists who were investigating government corruption, congressional staff members who had questioned intelligence agency budgets, and former intelligence operatives who possessed knowledge of illegal activities conducted by Harrison's network. Most disturbing was Sarah's discovery that she was not the only trainee at Site-7 who had been selected for induction into the assassination program. Harrison had identified several other recruits whose backgrounds and psychological profiles made them suitable for conversion into domestic assassins. The training program that was ostensibly designed to prepare intelligence operatives for legitimate overseas missions was actually being used as a screening and conditioning operation to identify candidates for Harrison's criminal network. The evidence Sarah gathered during her final infiltration of Harrison's office included detailed operational plans for upcoming assassinations, financial records showing payments to operatives for completed missions, and correspondence with senior government officials who were directing the selection of targets. The material was comprehensive enough to support criminal prosecutions that could dismantle the entire assassination network, but only if Sarah could survive long enough to deliver it to Elena Rodriguez and the law enforcement officials who were investigating Harrison's operations. Sarah's strategy for surviving her meeting with Harrison was based on her analysis of his psychological profile and operational methods. The commander's success in managing the assassination network had made him overconfident in his ability to manipulate and control the people around him. He expected trainees to be intimidated by his authority and impressed by his knowledge of their personal backgrounds and psychological vulnerabilities. Sarah planned to use these expectations against him by presenting herself as exactly the type of recruit he believed he could easily assess and control. The meeting took place in Harrison's official office on a Friday morning that dawned cold and clear in the Nevada desert. Sarah arrived precisely on time, carrying herself with the nervous energy that Harrison would expect from a trainee who was approaching graduation but remained uncertain about her future assignment. The commander's office was designed to intimidate visitors with its displays of military awards, photographs of Harrison with senior government officials, and maps marking locations where Site-7 graduates had conducted successful operations. Harrison began the session with questions about Sarah's experience at Site-7 and her goals for her intelligence career. His initial approach was friendly and encouraging, designed to put her at ease and encourage her to speak freely about her observations and concerns. Sarah responded with carefully rehearsed answers that portrayed her as focused on legitimate intelligence work and grateful for the training opportunities she had received at the facility. The commander's questioning gradually became more pointed as he probed for signs that Sarah possessed knowledge beyond what she should have learned through her official training. He asked about her observations of facility operations, her interactions with other trainees and instructors, and her understanding of the career paths available to Site-7 graduates. Each question was designed to test whether Sarah had noticed the inconsistencies and hidden activities that indicated the existence of programs beyond the official curriculum. Sarah's responses were masterfully crafted to reveal exactly what Harrison expected to see. A trainee who had noticed some unusual aspects of Site-7's operations, but who had interpreted them as normal security measures or advanced training activities that were beyond her current level of clearance. She expressed appropriate curiosity about her future assignments while demonstrating that she had not connected the fragments of information she had observed into a coherent understanding of the assassination network. The critical moment in the evaluation came when Harrison asked Sarah directly about her knowledge of the facility's hidden areas and classified programs. His question was phrased as a routine security inquiry, but Sarah could sense the intense focus with which he watched her reaction. This was the moment that would determine whether she lived or died, and everything depended on her ability to convince Harrison that she remained ignorant of his criminal activities. Sarah's response was a carefully calculated mixture of confusion and eagerness to learn more about the advanced aspects of intelligence work. She acknowledged that she had noticed some areas of the facility that seemed to be restricted, but explained that she had assumed they contained classified training equipment or secure communication facilities that were above her current clearance level. Her demeanor conveyed appropriate respect for security protocols combined with the natural curiosity that Harrison would expect from an intelligent trainee. Harrison's evaluation continued for nearly 2 hours as he tested Sarah's knowledge and reactions from multiple angles. He described hypothetical scenarios that closely paralleled real assassination operations to see if she would recognize them as familiar activities. He showed her photographs of former Site 7 graduates to determine if she had seen them in contexts that would suggest their involvement in illegal operations. Throughout the session, Sarah maintained the persona of an ambitious but naive trainee who interpreted everything she saw through the lens of legitimate intelligence work. The commander's final test was the most dangerous. He offered Sarah what he described as an opportunity to participate in advanced training exercises that would prepare her for the most challenging assignments in her intelligence career. The opportunity was presented as a reward for her exceptional performance during training, but Sarah recognized it as the beginning of the induction process into the assassination network. Her response had to demonstrate enthusiasm for career advancement while avoiding any indication that she understood the true nature of what was being offered. Sarah accepted Harrison's offer with the appropriate mixture of gratitude and nervous excitement. She asked questions about the advanced training that revealed her legitimate ambition to serve her country effectively, while demonstrating that she had no suspicion about the illegal nature of the programs Harrison managed. Her performance was convincing enough to satisfy Harrison's evaluation criteria, but it also committed her to a path that would lead to her induction into the assassination network within days of graduating from Site 7. The meeting concluded with Harrison expressing confidence in Sarah's potential for advanced intelligence work and assuring her that she would receive assignments worthy of her skills and dedication. He scheduled her for additional briefings that would begin immediately after her graduation ceremony, briefings that Sarah knew would introduce her to the reality of domestic assassination operations. She had successfully convinced Harrison of her ignorance and compliance, but in doing so, she had also trapped herself in a situation where escape would be nearly impossible. Sarah left Harrison's office with the knowledge that she had perhaps hours rather than days to complete her mission of exposing the assassination network. The evidence she had gathered was comprehensive and damaging, but it would be worthless if she could not deliver it to the outside investigators before Harrison's network moved to silence her permanently. The shy financial analyst who had been ridiculed by her fellow trainees was now the only person who stood between a massive criminal conspiracy and its continued operation at the highest levels of the American government. The final phase of Sarah's mission required her to escape from Site 7 with evidence that could destroy Harrison's assassination network while avoiding the sophisticated security measures that protected the facility. She had survived the psychological evaluation that should have sealed her fate, but now she faced the most dangerous part of her journey, getting out alive with proof of crimes that powerful people would kill to keep secret. The ridicule she had endured during her months of training had prepared her for this moment when everything depended on her ability to act decisively, while the entire weight of the intelligence establishment worked to stop her. Elena Rodriguez was waiting for Sarah's final transmission, ready to publish the story that would expose the assassination network to public scrutiny and trigger the criminal investigations that would bring Harrison and his accomplices to justice. But first, Sarah had to survive long enough to deliver the evidence that would make that exposure possible. The Blacksite that had been designed to break her spirit was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are those who have been underestimated and dismissed by the very people who should have recognized their potential.